My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I learned that day that the person you love most can destroy you with surgical precision. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comment below, and if you enjoy revenge stories, hit that subscribe button for more stories like mine. Thank you and enjoy listening. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The job interview had been my shot at finally using my social work degree, my chance to stop being a waitress and a grocery store clerk and become the person I'd fought so hard to be. I'd applied to dozens of positions over the past 6 months, getting rejection after rejection, slowly watching my savings dwindle and my hope fade. Now I understood why. Someone had been applying to the same jobs using my credentials, my name, my life. And that someone was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall from mine, probably getting ready for work at the marketing firm where she'd been employed for the past 3 months. Rosa had moved in with me 4 years ago when she'd aged out of foster care. She was 17, scared, and had nowhere else to go. I was 22, working 2 jobs and living in a studio apartment that barely fit one person, but I'd made room. She was family, the closest thing to a sister I'd ever had. I'd rearranged my entire life for her. Moved to a bigger apartment I couldn't afford. Given her my bed and slept on the couch for 2 years. Worked extra shifts to pay for her school supplies, her clothes, her food. I'd been the one to help her with homework, to celebrate when she graduated high school, to cry with her when she'd been rejected from the first college she'd applied to. When she'd finally gotten accepted to community college, I'd been so proud I'd cried. I'd worked overtime for months to help pay her tuition, eating ramen and peanut butter sandwiches so she could have textbooks and supplies. I'd driven her to campus on her first day, both of us nervous and excited about this new chapter in her life. But somewhere along the way, Rosa had decided that my life looked better than hers. I sat in my car outside our apartment building for an hour, trying to process what I'd learned. The job interview hadn't been a mistake or a coincidence. Rosa had systematically stolen my identity, my qualifications, my opportunities. She'd used the trust I'd given her, the access to my personal documents, the intimate knowledge of my history that came from living together for 4 years. She'd betrayed me with the thoroughness of someone who'd been planning this for a long time. When I finally went upstairs, Rosa was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up with a bright smile, the same warm expression that had made me want to protect her from the first day we'd met. "Elena, how did the interview go?" The casualness of the question, the perfect acting, made something cold settle in my chest. She knew exactly how the interview had gone because she'd already had it herself. "It was interesting," I said carefully. "They said they'd already interviewed someone with my name." For just a second, Rosa's smile flickered. But she recovered quickly, tilting her head with manufactured confusion. "That's weird. Maybe it's another Elena Rodriguez? There are probably dozens of us in the city. Maybe." I opened the refrigerator and pretended to look for something, using the movement to hide my face. This other Elena had the same degree as me. Same work experience. Same volunteer history. What are the odds? "Crazy coincidence," Rosa said, but her voice had gotten higher. "You know how these big companies are. They probably mixed up their files." I closed the refrigerator and turned to face her. She was stirring pasta sauce with unnecessary focus, not meeting my eyes. "Rosa, can I ask you something?" "Sure. How did you get the job at Morrison Marketing?" Her hands stilled for just a moment. "I told you. I applied online and they called me for an interview." "With what qualifications?" "You dropped out of college after 1 semester." The stirring stopped completely. When Rosa looked up, her face had changed. Gone was the warm, grateful cousin who'd been living in my home for 4 years. In her place was a stranger with calculating eyes and a hard mouth. "I guess I'm just naturally talented," she said. Naturally talented at identity theft. The words hung in the air between us like a blade. Rosa set down the spoon and crossed her arms, and I saw her make the decision to stop pretending. "You want to know the truth, Elena? Fine. I got tired of being your charity case. I got tired of watching you throw your life away on dead-end jobs while I was supposed to be grateful for your scraps." "My scraps." The words came out louder than I'd intended. I gave you everything. I worked myself into the ground to support you. You worked yourself into the ground because you're weak, Rosa said, her voice cold as winter. You're too scared to take risks, too nice to fight for what you want. So I took what you were too pathetic to claim. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. This was the girl I'd loved like a sister, the girl I'd sacrificed for, the girl I'd believed in when no one else would. I trusted you, I whispered. And I used that trust to build a better life. A life you were too scared to build for yourself. She turned back to the stove as if the conversation was over, as if she'd just told me she'd borrowed a sweater without asking instead of systematically destroying my future. Get out, I said. What? Get out of my apartment. Tonight. Rosa laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. This is my home too, Elena. My name's on the lease. It was true. I'd added her to the lease 2 years ago when she'd turned 18, wanting to give her security and stability. Another act of love that had become a weapon in her hands. Then I'll leave, I said. Good luck affording a place on a waitress's salary, Rosa called after me as I walked toward my bedroom. Maybe your next roommate will be stupid enough to pay your bills for you. I packed everything I owned into 3 suitcases and 2 garbage bags. 4 years of my life reduced to what could fit in the back of my Honda Civic. As I loaded the last bag, Rosa appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame like she was watching an entertaining movie. You know what's funny, she said. You actually did me a favor. I never would have thought to aim so high if I hadn't been living with someone who had such big dreams and such little follow-through. I straightened up and looked at her one last time. Someday, Rosa, this is going to catch up with you. She shrugged. Maybe. But until then, I'll be living the life you were too weak to claim. I drove away that night with nowhere to go and $23 in my checking account. I'd lost my job at the restaurant the week before when I'd asked for time off for interviews, and the grocery store had cut my hours because business was slow. Everything I'd built over the past 4 years was gone. My home, my family, my identity, my future. But as I sat in a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning, drinking coffee I couldn't afford and trying to figure out where I'd sleep that night, I made a decision that would shape the next 5 years of my life. I was going to destroy Rosa Martinez. Not quickly, not messily, but completely and systematically. The same way she'd destroyed me. The first step was surviving. I spent 3 weeks sleeping in my car and showering at the YMCA before I found a room in a boarding house that rented by the week. It was a tiny space with a shared bathroom and no kitchen, but it was mine and it was legal and no one could take it away from me. The second step was rebuilding my identity. Rosa had been using my name and credentials, but she'd been sloppy about it. She'd used different contact information, different addresses, different references. It took me 6 months of paperwork and phone calls and certified letters, but I managed to establish a clear trail showing that Elena Rodriguez, the social worker, and Elena Rodriguez, the marketing professional, were 2 different people. The third step was education. I couldn't afford to go back to school, but I could learn. I spent every free hour in the public library, reading law books and case studies, teaching myself about identity theft and fraud and the complex web of regulations that govern professional licensing. I learned that Rosa had committed at least 7 different felonies. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, perjury. The list grew longer as I dug deeper into what she'd done. But more importantly, I learned that the system was on my side if I was patient enough and smart enough to use it properly. The fourth step was the hardest. I had to become someone Rosa wouldn't recognize. The Elena she'd lived with had been soft, trusting, eager to please. She'd been someone who worked hard and hoped for the best, someone who believed that good things came to good people if they just waited long enough. That Elena was dead. In her place, I built someone harder, someone smarter, someone who understood that the world was a battlefield and mercy was a luxury I couldn't afford. I got a job as a paralegal at a small law firm, using my real credentials and a carefully crafted story about why I'd been out of the workforce. The pay was terrible, but I learned more in 6 months than I'd learned in 4 years of college. I watched lawyers strategize and plan, observed how they built cases piece by piece, saw how they used the law as both shield and sword. At night, I tracked Rosa's new life with the dedication of a detective. Social media made it easy. She'd kept using variations of my name and hadn't bothered to make her profiles private. I watched her get promoted at Morrison Marketing, saw her move into a beautiful apartment downtown, observed her dating a series of men who thought they were falling in love with Elena Rodriguez. She was living my life, but she was doing it carelessly. Too many photos, too many public posts, too many digital breadcrumbs that connected her crimes to her current identity. Rosa had always been impulsive, and success had made her reckless. I documented everything. Screenshots, printed emails, saved voice messages. I built a file that was 3 inches thick, organized with the precision of a legal brief. Every lie Rosa had told, every document she'd forged, every opportunity she'd stolen. It was all there, waiting for the right moment. That moment came during her 3rd year at Morrison Marketing, when Rosa made the mistake that would destroy her. She applied to law school. I found out through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned seeing Elena Rodriguez at an LSAT prep course. The irony was almost beautiful. Rosa was using my stolen identity to pursue the legal education I'd dreamed of but never been able to afford. But law schools are different from marketing firms. They do extensive background checks, verify every credential, cross-reference every claim, and they have very strict policies about academic fraud. I waited until Rosa had been accepted to her first choice, a prestigious program that would have guaranteed her a 6-figure starting salary, before I made my move. The letter I sent to the law school's admissions office was 12 pages long and included 47 pieces of supporting evidence. I laid out the entire history of Rosa's identity theft with the methodical precision I'd learned during my years as a paralegal. Every forged document, every stolen credential, every false statement she'd made on her application. But the law school was just the beginning. I sent similar letters to Morrison Marketing, to the State Licensing Board for Social Workers, to the District Attorney's Office, and to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Each letter was tailored to its audience, emphasizing the aspects of Rosa's crimes that would matter most to each recipient. Then I sat back and waited. The first domino fell within a week. Morrison Marketing fired Rosa after their own investigation revealed that she'd lied about her qualifications when they'd hired her. The law school withdrew her acceptance and flagged her application in their database, making it nearly impossible for her to apply anywhere else. The criminal charges took longer, but they were more thorough. The FBI had been looking for cases to use in prosecuting identity theft, and Rosa's crimes were textbook examples of how modern fraud worked. They built a case that included not just what she'd done to me, but similar crimes she'd committed against 2 other women whose identities she'd partially stolen. By the time Rosa was arrested, I had been accepted to law school myself, using my real name, my real credentials, and a scholarship I'd earned through my work with victims of financial fraud. The trial was set for my 2nd year of law school. 5 years after Rosa had destroyed my life, we were going to face each other in court. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but the reality was different than my fantasies. Rosa looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of what she'd lost. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, her eyes hollow in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate fear. When she saw me in the courtroom, sitting in the gallery with my law school notebooks and my neat suit, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, and finally, a kind of terrible understanding. She knew I'd done this to her. She knew I'd spent 5 years planning her destruction with the same systematic precision she'd used to steal my life. The prosecutor laid out Rosa's crimes with clinical efficiency. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, perjury, all the charges I'd researched and documented during my years of planning. The evidence was overwhelming, the case airtight. But when Rosa's defense attorney called me as a witness, something unexpected happened. "Ms. Rodriguez," the lawyer said, "you spent considerable time and effort investigating and documenting my client's alleged crimes. Would you say this was motivated by a desire for justice or by a desire for revenge?" I'd prepared for this question, had practiced my answer dozens of times. I was going to talk about justice, about protecting other victims, about the importance of accountability. But sitting there in that courtroom, looking at Rosa's hollowed-out face, I realized I couldn't lie. "Both," I said. The courtroom was silent. The prosecutor looked surprised. The defense attorney looked pleased, and Rosa looked like she was about to cry. "Can you elaborate on that?" the defense attorney asked. "Rosa destroyed my life," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning in my chest. "She stole my identity, my opportunities, my future. She did it coldly and systematically, and she showed no remorse when I confronted her about it. So yes, I wanted revenge. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to lose everything you'd worked for." I paused, looking directly at Rosa. But I also wanted justice. What she did was illegal, and it hurt other people besides me. She needed to be stopped, and the system needed to function. So I used my knowledge of the law to make sure both those things happened. "Do you feel your actions were justified?" the defense attorney pressed. I thought about the question for a long moment. About the 5 years I'd spent rebuilding my life, about the careful documentation and strategic planning, about the cold satisfaction I'd felt when I'd learned about Rosa's arrest. "I don't know," I said finally. "I know they were legal. I know they were effective. But justified? That's not for me to decide." The defense attorney looked frustrated, but she'd gotten what she wanted, an admission that my motives hadn't been pure. Rosa was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison plus restitution. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. I nodded, but I didn't say anything back. Sorry wasn't enough to undo 5 years of damage, and it wasn't enough to change what I'd become in my quest for justice. After the trial, I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and cried for the first time since the night Rosa had kicked me out of our apartment. Not tears of joy or satisfaction, but tears of grief for the person I'd been before all this started. The Elena who'd loved Rosa like a sister was gone, replaced by someone harder and colder and more calculating. I'd won, but the victory felt hollow in a way I hadn't expected. Rosa had stolen my identity, but in seeking revenge, I'd lost something more important. My capacity for trust, for forgiveness, for the kind of open-hearted love that had made me take her in the first place. I finished law school and became a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. I was good at my job, maybe too good. I understood predators because I'd become one myself, hunting Rosa with the patience and precision of someone who'd learned that the world was divided into victims and victimizers. But sometimes, late at night when I was working on a case, I wondered if there had been another way. If I could have found justice without becoming someone I didn't entirely recognize. If I could have stopped Rosa without losing myself in the process. Rosa was released after serving 3 years of her sentence. I know because I tracked her release the same way I'd tracked her crimes, methodically, obsessively, with the attention to detail that had become my defining characteristic. She moved back to the city where we'd grown up, got a job at a nonprofit working with foster kids aging out of the system. The irony was sharp. She was doing the work I'd originally dreamed of doing, helping kids like she'd once been. I could have had her fired. Her conviction made her technically ineligible for the position, and a few phone calls would have been enough to end her new career before it started. But I didn't make those calls. Not because I'd forgiven her, I'm not sure I ever will, but because I'd realized that justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about knowing when to stop, when enough is enough, when the pursuit of revenge becomes more destructive than the original crime. Rosa had stolen my life, but I'd stolen hers in return. We were even now, in the most terrible way possible. Last week, I got a letter from her. It was short and carefully written, probably reviewed by a lawyer before she sent it. She thanked me for not interfering with her new job, acknowledged the harm she'd caused, and offered to pay additional restitution beyond what the court had ordered. At the bottom, in handwriting that looked different than I remembered, smaller, more careful, she'd written, "I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope someday you can forgive yourself for what you had to become to stop me." The letter is sitting on my desk now, unopened except for that first reading. I don't know what to do with it, or with the insight it contains. Rosa was right about one thing. I did have to become someone different to destroy her. Someone colder, more calculating, more willing to use the law as a weapon. That transformation served me well professionally, but it cost me something I'm not sure I can get back. The question that keeps me awake at night isn't whether justice was served. It was. Rosa committed crimes and paid for them, and other potential victims were protected from her predations. The question is whether the person I became in the process of securing that justice is someone I can live with. Whether the Elena who emerges from this story is someone worth being. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have been inspired by this story, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, because we bring you revenge stories on a daily basis.